Thank you, Miranda. I definitely miss working for every dog. So I, as you said, I am in the East Coast. I work as a trainer in New Hampshire. I am the behavior and training manager at the New Hampshire SPCA. And then I share my life with two dogs. So I share my life with a dog named Pepper, and she's a 5-year-old mixed breed. And then I also share my life with a 3-year-old, or almost 3-year-old. He's going to be, his birthday is tomorrow. So he's going to be 3 tomorrow. Border Collie, who you guys see on the screen right here. And we're going to be talking a lot about him. His name is Clove, because he is a lot of what our exercise restriction survival guide is going to be based on. And as you can see in this picture, he had some sort of surgery at some point in his life, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So let's get into it. So this is just a general overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk a lot about Clove. We're going to be talking about enrichment, exercise restriction in general, managing your dog on exercise restriction, enrichment ideas. And then a really important topic is taking care of yourself. So let's talk about Clove. As I said, he is a almost 3-year-old border collie. I got Clove when he was about 14 weeks old, and we had like 2 months of like, he was a normal puppy. He could do normal puppy things. And then he, around 5 months, he got diagnosed with a condition in his shoulders where basically there's a bone fragment, and they have to go in and surgically remove that bone fragment. So he had to be on exercise restriction for about 3 weeks, and then he had surgery for that. And then from that surgery, he had to be on exercise restriction for 6 weeks. And for that exercise restriction, he had to be in a pen or in a crate at all times. And it was not super fun because he is a border collie, and he was a very young border collie at the time. So we learned from that. And then when he was 10 months old, after we've gone through the shoulder surgery and all of that, he was diagnosed with hip dysplasia. And he has mild hip dysplasia, so it wasn't terrible, but he was showing a lot of pain signs. So his vet recommended an exercise restriction. And for that exercise restriction, it was he could only do 30 minutes of exercise a day, and it had to be low impact exercise. So that looked like walking him around the block. And as you can imagine, he is an adolescent border collie at that time, and he had a really hard time with that. And for about 6 months, we did the exercise restriction, and we did a pain trial to figure out if anything was going to help him actually just live with his hip dysplasia. Sadly, nothing really worked for him on that, and he ended up having a hip replacement when he was about 1.5 years. So he had it on his left hip. And that surgery recovery was a lot more intense than the surgery recovery from his shoulder. His shoulder one was basically like just kind of keep him calm and make sure that he's not moving a whole lot and that kind of stuff. With the hip replacement, he had to be in a crate for a whole month, and he couldn't really move. And then for the last 2 months of the recovery, he could slowly build up, but it was like you start with 5 minutes of walking around, and then by the end, the goal is that they should be able to do like a mile. Again, that's not a whole lot of exercise for an adolescent border collie. So we learned from it. He gained some experience from it, and his hip replacement recovery was a little bit smoother than his shoulder recovery because I had a plan in place. It still wasn't super smooth because, again, he had a lot of odds against him. He was young, he has a high energy breed, and he had to be completely in a crate for a month. Like, that just sounds awful for him. So we had a plan, put it in place. Thankfully, now he is fully recovered, and he is, for the first time in his life, this has been his first year of life that he hasn't been on exercise restriction once, which is crazy to me that he's 3 years old, and this is the first time he hasn't been on exercise restriction. So that's about Clove. He's a little bit of everything in there. And just a side note, when I was making this presentation, my other dog, Pepper, ended up being on exercise restriction. So she is on exercise restriction right now. So I'm having that experience right now. She injured herself and we're just trying to figure out what's going on. So got a lot of experience on this front. And I'll be bringing up Clove a lot through this, but I just want to give you guys a little background information about exercise restriction when it comes to a dog and kind of how I survived mine and how much Clove was a struggle with that, but we came up with a plan and this is what it's based off of. So our next slide is all going to be about enrichment. And this is really, really important for our topic today, because when we're looking at enrichment, which is the concept of we're meeting all of an individual's needs, we have to be able to address our dog's enrichment framework for them to make sure that we're meeting all of those needs when that physical exercise is just really not an option, right? And before we kind of get into how to implement that enrichment, we have to look at how enrichment started and give you guys a little bit of background for that. So enrichment, and I'll really quick before I get into all about enrichment. First of all, I could talk about it forever, but a lot of this information is based off of the book Canine Enrichment for the Real World by Ali Bender and Emily Strong. If you guys have not read the book, highly recommend reading it. It was extremely beneficial. So the history of enrichment, it was originally used in other aspects, but we're going to talk about the first one where we really see it implemented, which was by Hal Markowitz. And he studied animals in wild and in zoos. And he started implementing enrichment a decade after the conservation movement in zoos, where basically they were starting a breeding program to try to conserve the animals, but these breeding programs weren't that successful. And Hal said it really wasn't successful because these animals were not behaviorally healthy, right? They're living in environments that are just not conducive to them doing species typical behaviors. So he implemented enrichment for them, building habitats that were more appropriate, that mimic the wild, giving them more outlets for those behaviors as well. And that's where a lot of the pet industry is based off their information from. And the pet industry kind of took it and ran with it and has a bit of a twist towards it. So a lot of times when you bring up enrichment, you think of enrichment toys, but enrichment is not just puzzle toys, and we'll get into it a little bit in the next slide, but I can never stress that enough. That is not giving your dog a snuffle mat. It's not giving your dog a puzzle toy to do. Enrichment has a lot of different categories. Not that those activities are not fulfilling in some sort of way. They're just not necessarily enrichment. And that's kind of how the pet industry kind of turned it around on it, where they're trying to look for a profit from it. And enrichment, you really want to think about it as all of these individuals have a need for, maybe it's the species typical things, but they all have a need. And when we're meeting the needs, it's important to look at them, right? All of them, not just one category, and be like, yeah, my dog's living a fulfilled life just from that one category, when there's a lot of other categories that are falling to the wayside. So that being said, we have some categories in here. And we have 14 categories for canine enrichment. And again, these came up by Ali Bender and Emily Strong, and they're from Pet Harmony. So all of the canine enrichment framework that we're going to be talking about today is based off of that. So there's 14 categories that we're looking at for canine enrichment. And it's crazy to me that there's 14, right? They're all important. And when we talk about them individually, you'll understand why. But we as humans focus a lot on the physical exercise, right? And that's just a small little piece of our canine enrichment. Obviously, it's important, but it's not as important as we think it is. And so the people who always say my dog gets walks and walks and walks all the time and they're living a fulfilled life might not necessarily have all the other categories. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they're fulfilled. And we put a lot as society is if you're not walking your dog, you're a bad dog owner, which is just not true, right? So it doesn't mean you're a bad dog owner if you don't walk your dog, or maybe your dog can't go on a walk. You can fulfill them in other ways for that. And you can meet that physical exercise need with other things that don't even have to be a walk, and your dog will probably be more fulfilled by that. So we have these 14 categories. Our first one that we're going to talk about is health and veterinary care. And when you think about that, it's your dog is getting regular vet visits, they're cleared of pain, they're getting teeth cleanings, things like that. That would be conducive to a dog that has that need fulfilled. Normally, it's just your dog is getting regular vet visits, right? They're getting their health checked out. The next one would be hygiene. So this would be doing cooperative care exercises or regular brushing, teeth cleaning, things like that, and just making sure that your dog generally is clean. Another one, the next one would be nutrition. And this would be finding a diet that your dog truly thrives on. So if your dog is on a diet that their coat is dull, they have dandruff, they're shedding a lot, and they're having a lot of GI upset, that's probably a category that needs to be reevaluated, right? And look at that nutrition factor. The next one, physical exercise. So as I said, physical exercise could be that walk, but it could be going and playing fetch in the backyard with your dog. It could be going and playing with your flirt pole. It could be throwing some treats down the hallway for them to go chase after. It could be doing canine fitness exercises. There can be a lot of different things in that category that you're looking at for fulfilling. Then we have sensory stimulation. So this is things like putting up visual barriers for your dog so they're not looking out the window and maybe being triggered all the time, or you're doing scent games with them, or massage or petting, things like that, but stimulating them through those activities. The next one is safety. And this one, there's safety and security, but they're two different things. So safety would be that your dog has, let's say, a secure yard. There's no poisonous plants in the yard. Maybe you're reducing the slippery floors in your house so that if your dog has joint issues, they're not slipping around everywhere. Then security is limiting, let's say, exposure to stressors, creating a safe space for your dog. Maybe your dog is nervous of fireworks and they have a safe spot in your closet or something like that. And then species typical behaviors. And this could be a lot of different things in there, but just an example of species typical behaviors that your dog could be doing. It could be tug, it could be flirt pull, it could be fetch, it could be chewing on something, it could be licking on something, but giving an outlet for those things. Another one that's really, really important is foraging. And foraging can be the act of using a food puzzle. It could be scatter feeding treats in your backyard and your dog is going and sniffing them out. It could be a puzzle toy. It could be your dog going and finding some sort of thing on the sidewalk to eat. Maybe you don't necessarily want them to be doing. Then we have social interaction. So this could be if your dog really likes hanging out with other people. It could be setting up some dates for them to go hang out with people they like. It could be social interaction with just you. It could be doggy play dates. So this is a picture of my dog Clove with one of his friends, Layla, and he finds that very enriching. The next category is mental stimulation. So a good example of this is training. So training can be a really good mental stimulation for your dog if that's doing fun tricks or you're working on some sort of cues such as sit or down, anything like that. And then we have calming. So calming kind of goes with, is your dog getting enough rest? Is your dog sleeping enough? And then maybe you need to help facilitate your dog doing calmer activities, such as doing a relaxation protocol. Next one is independence. So you're providing more choice to your dog and teaching your dog how to make choices on their own. could also be that if you have a dog that follows you around all the time in the house, how do you give them a little bit more independence through that? And then the last one is environment. Environment is more of creating a space that reduces stress, provides opportunities for rest, exploration, and play, and enables them to move freely. So those are some things that you want to keep in mind when it comes to environment. Sometimes we can't hit all of those, and that's okay. So when we're looking at enrichment and we're looking at all of these categories, it's important to note that we want to make sure that we're meeting your dog's needs by hitting all these points in these categories. Not everything's ever going to be perfect, but we need it to help build a fulfilled dog. And what's also really important for this is that you're looking at the whole picture a lot of times, and some of these categories overlap. So maybe you're like, oh my gosh, there's 14 categories. How am I going to have time to do all of this? And you can look at it and be like, okay, my foraging need can also be met with my species typical need, and my calming need can kind of go with my environment need. So you're looking at those different kinds of things. And we use a lot of these enrichment ideas and these frameworks. I use it almost every day with my clients because it really does change a lot of behavioral things as well when you're meeting a dog as a whole and fulfilling the dog as a whole. So, for example, when you're looking at a dog that maybe is counter surfing a lot and maybe stealing items around your house, that's a dog that's missing some things in their foraging need. So that might be that I'm going to increase some treat scatters in the yard, or I'm going to give them snuffle mats for dinner or something like that and increase that need a little bit. An example for when Clove had his shoulder surgery, he very much liked to chew up his bedding. So when he started to chew up his bedding, I started to give him more outlets for shredding things so that he would have that need met. And so he didn't have to go and seek out to meet that need. And so I started to give him shredding outlets such as cardboard or a toy that we didn't really care about, and him being able to shred that offered that opportunity for him to meet that shredding need. And then I saw a reduction in the shredding of his bedding, which was very helpful. So these are our 14 categories of enrichment. And now we have them. We kind of understand what we're looking for. Now let's talk about how we implement them, how we look at the dog as a whole and really think about how can I improve each category. So what we have here is how we're going to meet our dog's needs using the enrichment framework. So what I have here, this is a chart that Pet Harmony created, and sadly they do not give this out for free anymore. But if you get the Canine Enrichment for the Real World workbook, this gives an example on here. I'm giving you guys this example. You do not have to copy it word for word or use this in any way, but what you could use is something very similar where maybe you have the enrichment category. Is that need being met? And then what's your plan of action? So make it a little bit easier for yourself, because sometimes this can be a bit complicated when you're also dealing with a dog that's on exercise restriction. So when we're looking at this was a chart that I made for Clove, and this was post hip replacement. So at this point in his post hip replacement, he was already doing a 45-minute walk, and he was able to have some sort of exercise. It was not to the point where he should have had exercise at his age and with his breed, but we were building it up. And so we had to look at that exercise need. So if you guys can tell, in the health category, I said that the need was not really being met that well. And he didn't really have a lot of agency, which we want to think about as like choice for our dogs, because he was frequently handled during his recovery. And he was a dog that before all these surgeries, he loved going to the vet. He thought it was super fun. And then after, he was like, I want no one near me during the vet. So we thought about, for the plan of action for this, was starting some cooperative care practice and practicing consent testing when petting him, because he had some touch sensitivity around his rear end. So we looked at it like that. When you looked at the hygiene category, he is not super cooperative on brushing and handling. And again, because he has that sensitivity around his rear end. And so again, we were looking at some ways that we could introduce doing the hygiene things that he needed to do, like his nails being trimmed and the brushing, without actually making it a stressful thing. So I added in using a scratch board for nails, having a lick mat for brushing, things like that. His diet was fine. He just needed a little bit of some additives towards it, such as he had to take some Corson for his joints, things like that. His physical exercise definitely needed some work because he was not allowed to go run or play for the next month. And that was really hard. He really hated that. And so our plan of action to kind of meet some of that for him was doing a 45-minute walk in the morning, doing a 20-minute walk or 10 minutes of tug for him in the evening, something to kind of get that energy out, and then doing some fitness slash physical therapy exercises for him as well, 3 times a week. And then some species typical behaviors for him. Again, he didn't have a lot of say in these things because he was on exercise restriction. He was allowed to dig and sniff and shred when appropriate, which is a really good thing for him. And one thing that we started to do was adding some nose work sessions in there. He loves to go find an odor and search out for it. And that was a really good outlet for him to do some species typical behaviors. And then also a frozen Kong or topple in the evenings for dinner time was a good outlet for licking and chewing for him. And I won't go through all of these. The last one that was really, really helpful for us for calming aspect is that he would sleep, but he had a really hard time settling in the evenings or settling when something was foreign. And he still kind of struggles with that depending on the situation. But starting a relaxation protocol was really helpful to add in some calming aspects for him in his life. So this is helpful. Obviously, this is post hip replacement. He's still on some sort of exercise restriction, but when I'm looking at it, this is something that I adjusted throughout his recovery. Okay. So from the day that he came back from his hip replacement, this was already made up in a way that was appropriate for him. That physical exercise category was very low, and that was not something that we were focusing on. And we heavily focused on mental exercise. So doing lots of training sessions that were low movement, things like that. And we focus a lot on species typical behaviors, such as frozen toys and puzzle toys, and even some nose work that we could do without a lot of movement. And then we focus a lot on foraging, again, doing some food puzzles, doing some find it games, doing some snuffle mat stuff. And so this is something that even though you set this plan in action, you can come back and adjust as it goes, but it's really helpful just to even have it written down. You write it down, you put it on the fridge, you refer back to it when you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do with my dog right now. This is something to refer back to, because yes, the physical exercise is not the outlet that we can do right now, but we have all of these other things to build a fulfilled dog. And so we can really focus on that. So if there's anything you can take from this, physical exercise is not all it's cracked up to be when you're looking at the dog as a whole. So take this as a reference point of like, okay, I'm going to look at my dog and be like, okay, is there species typical behaviors being met? And can I meet them while they're on exercise restriction? And what kind of plan and action could I do for that? So speaking of plan of action, let's talk a little bit about our exercise restriction and then talk about what exactly could we do to help fulfill our dogs during exercise restriction. Let me just take a quick sip over here. So why do dogs have to be on exercise restriction? There's a lot of reasons that they can be on exercise restriction. A top one is going to be surgery or injury. Surgery could be maybe they're having a hip replacement, maybe they just got spayed or neutered. maybe they broke their legs, something like that, and that probably would be around the injury category. And then the injury would be maybe they have a hurt paw, maybe they cut their foot, maybe they broke something like that. And then we also have heartworm treatment. So that can be another one that's a medical reason why your dog could be on exercise restriction, and that can be pretty strict as well. Then we have environment. So that means like it's not really conducive to going out and walking and getting the physical exercise. Maybe I'm just not in the environment for that. And then weather. That can be a really big one. As Miranda said, I used to be an employee for Every Dog, and so I lived in Texas, and Texas in the summertime is not the best because it's super, super hot. So it's not really conducive to going out and walking your dog unless if you go out really, really early in the morning. Same kind of things in the winters here. If it gets really, really cold, you can't really go out. And so that weather can really restrict you in those moments. And then the last one, reactivity and fear can be a really big one. So maybe you're trying to reduce how many stressors your dog is seeing throughout the day, and going outside and going for a walk is just not what is possible. You don't have a backyard, so you can't get that physical exercise. So we can have that exercise restriction based off of behavior. And quick, just little side note for this, when I was making this, I was thinking of those reasons, and I was like, wow, reactivity and fear can be a really big one. And my dog Pepper, when I lived in Texas, I lived in a pretty busy apartment complex, and she was absolutely terrified to go outside, and she did not want to go to walks anywhere. We would go dry places. She was really scared. She has a lot of noise sensitivity. For about 5 months, she just did not go out for a walk, and I didn't even think about that as an exercise restriction. And like obviously we could have done things inside and gotten that exercise, and we did, but I guess that would count as an exercise restriction for her, that she couldn't go out and get that exercise need fulfilled. And we lived in an apartment at the time, so we couldn't go and go play ball in the backyard or something like that. So that's another really big category. So we think about those surgeries and the injuries, but reactivity or fear is a pretty big one for that. And if you guys see in the picture in the left-hand corner, that is Clove in his stroller. When this was before he had his hip replacement, but we utilized it during his hip replacement to get him to get out and see the world a little bit more. And that's just another way that we kind of met that need. It was very cute. He was not super into it by the end because he was like, get me out of here, but it was a good way to meet that like social need for him. So let's talk about managing our dogs during exercise restriction. So we have some categories here. Our first one is confinement. And when we're looking at confinement, it's looking at, is it appropriate for the restriction? So in this picture here, this is Clove during his hip replacement, and he had to be in a crate the entire time. When he was in his shoulder surgery era, he had to be in a pen, so he had a bit more movement and a bit more choice in there. And we want to look about how we could probably improve that space. So maybe we could make it a little bit more enriching for them. So here for him, I added a toy for him so that he could maybe play with that. He got some chews in there as well, so we had access to things at all times. When I did the pen for him during his shoulder surgery, I added in some non-slip flooring for him so that he had no traction on there, so that he wasn't slipping around anywhere. And don't count that out, that's enrichment for him, right? That's a safety thing. So looking at that confinement and being like, okay, how could I possibly improve this a bit for him during this time? And sometimes it's not possible, and that's okay, but there is always something we could maybe add in for it. The next one's routine. It's really critical that you keep a solid routine with your dog. Feeding them at the same time, medicating them at the same time, giving them treats and chews and all that kind of stuff around the same time. It can be a bit of an unpredictable time for them, especially if they're doing that surgery or injury or heartworm treatment. It can be a bit like unpredictable, and they're like, okay, what's happening? I normally do this and I don't know why this is happening now. So adding in that predictability for them is extremely helpful. It's not only helpful for them, it's also really helpful for you to keep on that routine for them so that you have that predictability. Another key one is reducing or increasing stimulation. So this could be where your dog is being confined. Maybe they're in a really busy place in the house and they're just not getting enough sleep because they're in a busy place in the house. Maybe we're going to go put them in a bedroom where they can go and get enough rest. For Clove during this, reducing and increasing stimulation, he wanted to be where the people are. So we ended up moving his crate back where there was heavy traffic, and he was much happier about that. So it really does depend on the dog, but you're looking at, again, the confinement or the area that they're in. How can I increase or decrease some of that stimulation? That also goes with, if you have a reactive dog or a fearful dog, maybe I'm going to put some window film up on my window so my dog can't see out. And then maybe I'm going to put some white noise on so my dog can't hear anything that's going on outside. Really important one, medication. And I could have done a whole slide on this, but I decided not to. And before I even address the medication aspect, I'm not a vet, so I don't know what your dog should be prescribed. I don't know the ins and outs of what's going on. The medication can be really, really helpful, especially if your dog is in pain or your dog is on exercise restriction to help keep them calm. You want to think about that as addressing the calm category in our enrichment framework, where maybe my dog does need it to help. And when Clove was on exercise restriction, he had to be pretty heavily medicated because he had a hard time, and he would fight through it. We had to adjust it many times, and it's something that you don't want to overlook. And you also want to talk to your vet thoroughly about it to make sure that there's the right medication, the right dosage. And sometimes when your dog is on exercise restriction and on a medication long term, you might have to talk to your vet about increasing that medication during that exercise restriction. Clove had to be increased for his medication like multiple times for his calming stuff because he just got used to it and he kept fighting it. So we had to increase it to make sure that he was comfortable. And the vet said it was common. But you don't want to overlook this one. This one can be a little bit controversial for some people, but it's definitely an important one, especially if you have a dog that has to be crated for, let's say, 3 months, or a dog that has to have heartworm treatment where they really can't get excited. Those things are really key. And then our last one is adjusting your expectations. So your dog is not going to be the same dog that they were when they had their normal routine. And obviously, as I said, physical exercise is not the end all be all for our dogs, but it is something that can be really, really important. So when you're looking at the exercise restriction, your dog is not going to be the exact same. Clove was a lot more hyper, and he had a little bit more of those, if you want to call them, like naughty behaviors, because he didn't have that outlet, and he really did need it for a high energy dog like him. So I adjusted my expectations of what he could actually handle, if it was training wise, it was behavior wise, if it was a relationship wise, and it's making sure that we do that. We also want to look at it, we have to adjust our plans to accommodate their new needs. We might have this outlook of how we have been addressing their needs this entire time during their life, but during the time that they have exercise restriction, we're going to have to change that because they're not going to be the same as they were when they were being able to do all the things that they normally can, especially if they're in pain as well. So those are really key things that we want to think about when we're managing our dogs. We obviously have our enrichment framework, and these different things address those, but these are ways to make this a more comfortable time for everyone in those. So our next thing, we're going to talk about enrichment ideas for our dogs. I have 2 categories here. I have enrichment that is more of the mental exercise, which is on this page. And then I have enrichment that's more of a durational activity. And there's two categories here because we want to have a category for the mental exercise, or what I call the you actually have to physically be with them to do the exercise. And I'll kind of talk about that in our last slide, but it's helpful because we can do these things with them. And then we also can have something that can help us create some space from them if needed. So mental exercise. This was part of our enrichment framework. And training was the example that I gave you guys. But there's other things that we can do in there. And again, could hit other categories, but we're going to just address this for right now. So some examples. You could do some scent games or some nose work. So I love this. This is a really easy one for everyone to get started. Nose work could be as simple as you're hiding treats around the house and your dog has to go search for them. And it can be as hard as you're hiding an odor tin in another room. Your dog has to go find the odor and detect it and alert for it. So there's different levels to it. You could also put some treats in a box and your dog has to go smell them out, but it's a really good outlet for them. I know I do this with Clove all the time. We do 10 minutes of it and he is pretty tired after it because he just has to mentally use his brain so much for it. So when I did his hip replacement, the way that we implemented the scent games and the nose work was I worked on imprinting an odor for him so that he would start to know that when he smelled birch, the essential oil, that there were treats involved, and I wanted him to do a nose target to it. And that was, he could be laying down the whole time, and it was a very easy exercise for him. And then physical therapy might be something that your dog has to do if they're injured or they've had surgery. So that could be something as a mental exercise that you could be doing with your dog. And that is something to talk to your vet about, but it could be a really good exercise for them. And then we have our training components. So I love trick training. Trick training is super, super fun. And it's really easy for you guys to do with your dog. And during Cloves' shoulder surgery, we did his intermediate trick title, which is what the picture you'll see in the middle there. And it was a really great way for us to pass the time. We would do a 10-minute trick session once a day, and he loved it. It was a really great way to fulfill him. Another really great one to do is the shaping game, 101 things to do with a box. And that's really simple. You put a box down anytime your dog interacts with it. You can click and treat or say yes and treat. And you're just looking for them to like engage and use their brain and figure out what exactly is earning them the reward. And then another really easy one to do while your dog is not necessarily able to move around a whole lot is doing cooperative care training. And cooperative care training is adding in consent with care practices. So that could be desensitizing your dog to brushing or working on some nail trims, things like that, as long as your dog is having a good time with it. So those are some ideas for mental exercise. I didn't give you guys a whole lot. And the reason is that I didn't give you guys a whole lot is because I don't want it to be that you have 101 things to do with your dog and you have to narrow it down with these certain things. You're looking at your dog as a whole and being like, oh, maybe my dog will like this. Maybe I can rotate these exercises around to meet my dog's needs. Another one that's in our mental exercise category or our we actually have to be there with them category is you could do car rides if your dog is willing and likes to do them and it's not a safety issue. I know I did that. I've been doing that with Pepper. Like Pepper absolutely loves going for car rides. And right now, while she can't go for walks or go play ball or anything, we go for car rides and she loves it. And it's a good way to get her some mental stimulation in there. So our next one, durational activities. I know in the beginning when I talked about enrichment, I said that puzzle toys are not enrichment, but we're going to talk about puzzle toys and we're going to talk about Kongs and chews and things like that. They can be enrichment for your dog. They can be enrichment activities because they are fulfilling that species typical behavior. Side note from that, when we're looking at enrichment, the way that we know it is enrichment, right? If I just went and like gave my dog a Kong and they didn't interact with it and they kind of looked over it, that is not an enrichment activity, okay? So the animal is the one that finds it enriching. So just because you gave it to them doesn't mean that it's necessarily enriching. And I'll give an example for this. Pepper absolutely loves like snuffle mats. Like that is something she finds really, really enriching. It's a really great activity for her. Clove, on the other hand, really likes tearing apart cardboard boxes, and he finds that enriching. If I gave Pepper the cardboard box to shred, Pepper would run the other direction. She's terrified of boxes. And so that activity, even though it's technically an enrichment activity, is not enriching for her. So the animal is the one that finds the activity enriching. So sometimes you might have to try some different things with them. So back to our durational activities. So when we're looking at the durational activities, we have things such as frozen Kongs and topples, we have lick mats, we have snuffle mats, we have long-lasting chews, shredding activities, puzzle toys. Frozen Kongs and topples, a really great way to utilize this in your daily routine is that you could feed their breakfast and their dinner out of those. So that's what I am doing currently with Pepper, breakfast and dinner out of a frozen Kong. I just soak her food in some hot water and then put a couple like either like plain yogurt or like a wet food, and I mix it, and then I put that in the topple, which is what you see here. And she finds that enriching, and that's a really great way. I have to feed her, so I'm going to give her an enrichment activity. Lick mats, same kind of thing. I could put their food on it. I could put some plain yogurt. I could put some peanut butter, but giving them an outlet for that licking. Snuffle mats as well. You could sprinkle some food in there. But again, you're looking at utilizing their food as an enrichment activity for these, especially if they can't get that physical exercise. You want to just keep an eye, a close eye on that nutrition category so they're not gaining too much weight from it if they're not physically active. Long-lasting chews are really awesome. So bully sticks are a really good one. I always recommend beef cheek rolls, and the reason I always recommend beef cheek rolls is they're cheap and they last a really, really long time. I think I bought like 4 in the time that Clove had his 6-week shoulder surgery recovery, and that was the entire time because it takes him, he would get one once a day, 45 minutes of chewing, pretty good for that. And then we could use it again and use it again until it was gone. So that's a really good long lasting chew. Shredding activities, I love doing shredding activities with our dogs, and that can be as simple as putting some kibble in a box and having them shred it to get to the kibble. It can be using toilet paper rolls or paper towel rolls and shoving food in there and them shredding it to get to it. Or as in the picture here that you guys see, it's a 6-pack full, I think it is, or a 4-pack bottle holder, and there's toilet paper rolls and food stuffed in there, so they have to dig it out and shred it. That is Clove's absolutely favorite activity ever. You can actually physically see him like decompressing when he does one of those activities. So simple things like that, and also things that you have in your house. And then puzzle toys are a really good one. It does depend on the dog if your dog finds it enriching, but I always add it in there. My dogs don't necessarily find it enriching because they do it one time and then they're like, it's super easy. So I tend to opt for treat dispensing toys such as a Kong wobbler or Snoop, that they have to like push out the food and then search for the food on the ground, because it's a bit more of an enriching activity for them. So those are a lot of ideas in there. Some things that help you out Make sure that you prep the frozen Kongs and Topo like in advance. Like I would do it every Sunday, and then I would have it in the freezer. So if I needed it, I could go and I could take it out at any point. And having those other things ready if you need it, or having a plan about when you're going to give them throughout the day, so that there's a process to the enrichment a bit. So there isn't a dog that's just waiting for something to do. That's obviously still going to happen in some opportunities, but having a plan of what you're going to give them for an activity. Could it be training? Could it be any of these things? So again, I'm not giving you a whole lot of ideas because I don't want it to be that you're overwhelmed with too many options. We're keeping it really small because these are things that you could easily implement into your daily routine that don't have to be too overwhelming, but could easily add to a lot of those categories that we're looking at for enrichment while your dog is on exercise restriction. And these are really tailored for the dogs that can't do a lot of activity. If you're looking for like, my dog can still do stuff inside, just can't go outside, you could do simple things like throw a tennis ball down the hallway and they have to go grab it and bring it back, or even just tossing a treat down. You could use a flirt pole. And if you don't know what a flirt pole is, I always call it just a giant cat toy. It's a rod with a string and a toy on the end, and your dog has to go run after it, and you can easily do that inside with your dog. So there's some options in there for our dogs during this time of exercise restriction, but the most important part of it all is looking at those categories, and seeing how we can fulfill those things. And if you're seeing something pop up with your dog of like, who maybe they don't normally like bark during this time, like what do I do? Look at those categories again and be like, oh, you know what, maybe they're missing that social interaction category and they're really just trying to look for the social interaction. Then it could be increasing some of that for them. So those are our ideas for exercise restriction. Our last slide, and this I would say is like the most important slide because you're the one taking care of your dog, so it's really important. This is about taking care of yourself. So there's three main things I want you guys to look at. You want to remember that enrichment is really important for your dog, but also self-care is really important for you during this time. You want day as possible. So you want to make sure that you have that in there. And then the last one is create space. So sometimes our dogs get on our nerves, and that's okay. And especially during this time, if maybe your dog is having a bit of a harder time and that leads into you having a bit of a harder time, it's okay if you need to take a break from your dog, since this can be a bit of a trying time for your relationship if you have a little bit more of a difficult dog on that. So those are really, really key points for this, to make sure that you're looking at yourself and your dog as a whole and making sure that you're meeting your needs, because you cannot meet all of your dog's needs if you're not meeting your own, and that's really important. So last little thing before we end for tonight, it's temporary, right? Hopefully our exercise restriction is temporary, that this is going to be a little blip in our timeline and we're going to go ahead and be able to move on from it. But now we have a little bit of a overview and some tools of what could be helpful for our dogs in this moment. I never imagined that I would survive my dog's exercise restriction. He, as I said in the beginning, like he was on exercise restriction for basically 2 years of his life, and being able to have him now where he's not on exercise restriction and I can really see who he truly wants to be, it's really awesome. And we've healed our relationship from our trying time together, and I thoroughly enjoy sharing a life with him. But it always was in the back of my mind that we just have to kind of get through this, and we're going to do all these things, and then once we get through it, we're going to be able to work on all the things we want to work on and do more things together. So that was really, really important for that. So just remember it's temporary, but we have some things to fall back on if we need to. And that is it for tonight.
You did it.
Yay.
So many new things. Okay, awesome. That was a lot of information. And for folks, again, who haven't read Canine Enrichment for the Real World, definitely recommend it. And they have the workbook as a separate thing, right, Kelley? So you can buy the book and read it that has all the information. And then there's a separate workbook. So if you want to work through some things with your own dog and get more detail, that's a great resource for you. Okay, questions. If you have questions, put them in the comments. One question we had, Liz says, my dog is lazy and isn't that food motivated. He will begrudgingly take walks, but loves to hike, which I can't do every day. I tried food, toys, puzzles, and he loses interest fast. I want to give him a fulfilling life, but he doesn't want to exercise very much. What can I do?
So look at your dog as a whole, and like, he might just not find those things enriching, as we've talked about. So it might be maybe finding different things in those categories that could be something that he finds enriching. Maybe he wants more social interaction with you. Maybe he wants more social interaction with other dogs. Maybe it's all of the above. Like, it could be just he is living an enriching life, but it's not what you think in necessarily it could be enriching. And I'll use an example, like my dog Pepper, her exercise restriction right now is like a breeze, because I say her love language is quality time. Like, that's her biggest thing that she finds enriching. And so I utilize that a lot. Like, she would much rather just like sit on the couch and me pet her. And that's what she needs for a fulfilled life. So it might be looking at your dog in that perspective of like, maybe he just wants that. Maybe he doesn't want the puzzle toys. Maybe he doesn't want to go around the block, but maybe he likes hanging out at home, and that's okay.
Yeah, I love that. We when you mentioned love languages, we had Adam Scandarani who did a lovely webinar for us, I think last year, about your dog's love language. And so they basically went through, some of the different things, and the idea that, humans, we know, like you could not pay me enough to go to the gym every night. Some people need that in order to stay sane. My dog loves to just cuddle on the couch and sleep for most of the day. And that doesn't mean she's bored. It's just that's what she likes to do. So I think sometimes, so Liz, when you say physical exercise isn't required for a healthy dog, some physical exercise, but that depends on the dog. So like, our Belgian Malinois and our, English Bulldog, different exercise needs. And across, American Pit Bull Terriers, like my dog, like some of them need a lot of exercise and others really don't. So we're looking at what's the fallout, right? So if I have a dog where if I don't exercise her for a 10-mile walk every day, what happens, right? Is she bouncing off the walls? Is she trying to get attention? Is she destroying things? Or is she just like, I'm conked out, this is fine, right? So we're looking at the individual dog to tell us, what their requirements are, just like our people have different requirements.
Yeah, exactly.
I think you have stumped everyone, Kelley. There are no other questions.
Oh,
I love that you gave us some different ideas from both Clove and Pepper.
yeah.
Any like final thoughts or main reminders for folks who are going through exercise restriction, whether it's something like heartworm treatment or an injury? Any major takeaways from you before we leave people?
My biggest thing is that it's temporary, but making sure that there is that time frame where you address your dog, but you also address yourself. And that's really important for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. We really appreciate it. And Kelley, thank you so much for this. And that is an amazing photo of you and Clove. That is great. So it's
Thank
great to see
you.
you. Y'all have
Yeah.
a lovely evening, and we'll see you next time. All right. Bye.
Bye.